Without me, she'd be homeless. I've been housing her for 7 years out of pity, and this is the gratitude I get. My father's voice echoed through the courtroom, so loud and commanding that the court stenographer stopped typing for a split second. A few relatives in the back row chuckled softly. I didn't look up. I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap and stared at the dark oak railing in front of me, listening to the slow, rhythmic creak of the ceiling fan spinning overhead. The humidity of Newport, Rhode Island, had a way of making even a stone courthouse feel sticky in late September. Then, Judge Whitmore looked directly at me. Not at my attorney, not at my father, but at me. In a voice so quiet and measured it sent a chill down my spine, he asked. So, Ms. Vance, they really have no idea? The courtroom went dead silent. My father's lawyer, a high-priced attorney named Richard Vance adjacent, blinked in confusion. Your Honor? No idea about what? Judge Whitmore slowly leaned back in his leather chair, looking at the papers on his desk. Actually, the legal owner of the estate is. He stopped himself. And that was the exact second my father's face lost all of its color. But none of that happened first. The truth is, my life had already fallen apart long before we stepped into that courtroom, and the saddest part was that my own family had never even noticed. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 58 years old, divorced, retired, and until that morning, the entire town of Newport believed I was a washed-up, lonely woman living off her father's charity. Truthfully, I had let them believe it. I'd been living quietly in the guest house of Vance Cliffs, our family's oceanfront estate, for 7 years. The mansion sat on the edge of the historic district, tucked behind massive oak trees and looking out over the Atlantic. It was old money, grand and imposing, with stone pathways and wide porches that tourists stared at while driving past slowly. My father loved telling people it had been in the Vance family for generations. That wasn't true. But again, I let him believe whatever he wanted. Most mornings, I woke before sunrise, made black coffee, and sat on the porch listening to the ocean while the cool sea breeze drifted through the trees. I liked the quiet. After the kind of career I had lived, silence was a luxury. 3 days a week, I volunteered at the local veterans shelter downtown. Most people there knew me simply as Ellie. I helped them fill out pension paperwork, drove them to medical appointments, and sometimes just sat with them, listening to stories that nobody else had the patience to hear anymore. Old soldiers recognize certain things in each other. Silence. Discipline. The habit of sitting where you can see every exit in a room. They noticed it in me, but they never asked questions. That generation understood boundaries. My father, Arthur Vance, understood none. At 80, he still carried himself like he owned every room he walked into. He had run a massive commercial construction company in the 80s when Newport was undergoing a luxury building boom. People respected him, or maybe they just feared him. Sometimes those two things look the same. My mother passed away 12 years ago, and after that, whatever softness my father possessed went into the ground with her. He became harder, sharper, and meaner in quiet, casual ways. Especially toward me. My younger brother, Julian, could do no wrong. It didn't matter that he was 54 and buried in debt from failed luxury condo deals. My father still introduced him proudly at country club dinners as the visionary developer. Me? I was poor Eleanor, mentioned with disappointment attached to every syllable. She never really recovered after her divorce, my father would whisper to the neighbors. Asterisk, she lives in my guest house because family takes care of family. Asterisk. The truth sat right in front of him every single day. But he was too blind to see it. The Sunday dinner that started everything happened in late August. The heat was heavy, sticking to the glass windows of the mansion. Julian had arrived wearing loafers without socks, talking loudly into his phone about a new waterfront development that probably didn't exist. His wife, Victoria, carried a store-bought key lime pie and acted exhausted before she even sat down. I made roasted chicken. Nobody thanked me. That was normal. Halfway through the meal, my father dabbed his mouth with a cloth napkin and announced, I've decided to sell Vancecliffs. I looked up slowly. Julian froze mid-bite, his eyes widening. The property taxes are getting ridiculous, my father continued, gesturing with his fork. And frankly, this place is too much house for one old man. Julian has a buyer lined up, a commercial developer who wants to turn the cliffs into luxury condos. He glanced directly at me. So, you'll need to make other arrangements, Eleanor. Julian needs the sale finalized by next month to clear his liquidity. Victoria avoided eye contact. Julian suddenly became very interested in his glass of iced tea. I set my fork down. The metal clinked against the porcelain. You can't sell it, Dad. The room went silent. My father let out a dry, patronizing laugh. Excuse me? You cannot sell Vancecliffs. His eyes narrowed immediately, the same look he had given me my entire childhood right before he decided I needed to be humiliated. I think I know what I own, Eleanor. You've lived under my roof for 7 years for free. Without me, you'd be living in some government-subsidized apartment. I almost smiled. A government apartment. If only he knew. Instead, I stood up quietly and began to gather the dirty plates. You should talk to a title lawyer before you sign any contract, Dad, I said softly. That only made him angrier. 10 days later, I was officially served with eviction papers. Julian called me that evening, pretending to sound sympathetic. You know how Dad gets, Ellie, he sighed. Just apologize, tell him you'll move into a smaller condo, and he'll drop the lawsuit. Apologize for what, Julian? A long silence followed. You always have to make things difficult. You're ruining the family's future. I hung up. At my age, you start to recognize patterns. Families create roles for each person, and they cling to those roles even when reality changes. Julian was the golden son who needed saving. I was the disappointment. Nothing, not success, not sacrifice, not the truth, was allowed to interrupt that story. The lawsuit spread through Newport faster than a summer storm. At the local harborside cafe, people whispered when I walked in. Did you hear? Arthur Vance is evicting his own daughter. Poor Eleanor, she's always been unstable. I heard it all, and I let them talk. Because after 30 years in federal intelligence, I had learned a valuable lesson: people reveal their true nature when they think you are completely powerless. 2 weeks before the first hearing, I stopped by the county courthouse to file my response with my attorney, Patricia Hale. Patricia was 73, sharp as broken glass, and one of the few people in New England who knew the full truth about my life. As we walked into the courthouse lobby, an elderly bailiff looked up from his desk. The second his eyes landed on me, his posture changed instantly. His spine straightened, his shoulders squared, and he gave a crisp, respectful nod. Good afternoon, ma'am, he said quietly. Not Miss Vance. Not Eleanor. Ma'am. Patricia noticed my father standing across the lobby with Julian. They had noticed the bailiff's reaction, too. For the first time since the lawsuit began, I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross my father's face. But his pride quickly swallowed it whole. The hearing took place on a rainy Tuesday morning in September. The air smelled of wet wood and old paper. The gallery was packed with curious neighbors, members of the country club, and several veterans from the shelter who had quietly taken seats in the back. My father's attorney, Richard Coleman, began aggressively, gesturing toward me with a sneer. Your Honor, this is a simple matter of property rights. Mr. Arthur Vance generously allowed his emotionally struggling daughter to reside in his guest house following her divorce. She has contributed nothing to the property taxes, nothing to the maintenance, and now she is blocking the sale of the estate. Judge Whitmore looked at Patricia Hale. Does the defense have a response? Patricia stood up. She didn't look nervous. She looked like she was about to close a trap. Your Honor, Patricia said evenly. We have submitted the certified title records for Vance Cliffs. The estate does not belong to Arthur Vance. It was purchased in 2005 under a private heritage trust registered in Washington, D.C. Coleman laughed. That's ridiculous. Arthur Vance has lived there for decades. He has lived there because the trust allowed him to, Patricia replied, handing a set of certified documents to the bailiff. The sole owner, creator, and funder of that trust is my client, Eleanor Vance. The room went dead silent. My father blinked hard, his hands gripping the table. What? That's impossible. Eleanor doesn't have that kind of money. Patricia opened another folder. For 31 years, my client served in the United States Navy. Her last assignment was as the Director of Naval Intelligence Operations at the Pentagon. She retired with the rank of Rear Admiral. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Julian stared at me as if he were seeing a ghost. Judge Whitmore reviewed the papers. As some of these records contain classified defense details, this court will not discuss operational history. However, the title is clear. Ms. Vance purchased the estate in 2005 for $12 million to save her father's construction company from bankruptcy, keeping the purchase private to protect his reputation. She has also secretly paid the property taxes and maintenance fees through the trust. My father's face went completely white. He looked at me, his mouth open, unable to speak. Furthermore, Patricia added, the trust shows that Ms. Vance was the anonymous donor who paid for her mother's cancer treatments in 2012, and she was the one who wired $200,000 to Julian Vance in 2011 to save him from a federal wire fraud indictment. The gallery erupted into whispers. The proud story my father and brother had built about me was collapsing in public, piece by piece. For the first time in my life, I saw my father look afraid of me. Not because I had raised my voice, but because the truth had stripped away his armor. The judge dismissed the eviction lawsuit immediately. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed my father, asking about the secret Admiral daughter and the bankrupt construction company. For a man who loved public attention, the whispers of the town were a fate worse than death. My father quietly packed his bags and moved out of Vance Cliffs, renting a small, cheap room at a highway motel rather than facing me every day. His pride was still too swollen to accept my presence. 3 weeks later, Julian's real estate development company collapsed under the weight of his unpaid debts. Without my secret financial safety nets, his banks called in his loans. He was forced to sell his luxury car and move into a small apartment. One evening, Julian came to the estate. He stood on the porch, looking exhausted and broken. Why didn't you tell us, Ellie? He whispered, staring out at the dark ocean. Why did you let us think you were a failure? Because once people know what you are, I said softly, they stop seeing who you are. I was tired, Julian. I spent 30 years carrying the weight of classified operations. I didn't want to be the Admiral anymore. I just wanted to be a daughter. But you only respected power you could see. He had no answer. He turned and walked back to his car. 2 days later, my father suffered a minor stroke in his motel room. I drove to the hospital through a heavy storm. When I walked into the room, he looked so small in the hospital bed, frail, pale, and stripped of his booming voice. I'm sorry, Eleanor, he whispered, a tear rolling down his wrinkled cheek. I punished you for becoming everything I never was. I was proud of you. I just didn't know how to say it. Hearing those words at 58 years old still hurt like a child hearing them too late. But sometimes, too late is still enough to matter. I brought my father home to Vance Cliffs. I converted the downstairs study into a bedroom for him, and we spent the winter talking, really talking, for the first time in our lives. He learned to listen, and I learned to let go of the old silence. I didn't keep the mansion for myself. With Patricia's help, I turned Vance Cliffs into the Vance Heritage Guild, a non-profit retreat providing housing and workshops for retired craftsmen, veterans, and historic preservationists who had spent their lives building things with integrity. Sometimes, I sit on the back porch with my coffee, watching the ocean waves crash against the rocks while the wind chimes play in the wind. The house is full of life now, full of people who understand the value of honest work. I learned that revenge sounds satisfying when you are hurting. But when the dust settles, all you want is peace. If you also believe that quiet strength and integrity will always outlast the loudest pride, leave one word in the comments below. Truth.